So yeah, this is the member-led session number 5, local actors at the heart of localizations. These sessions will be moderated by Grace Ananda, and then we will have 3 speakers with us today: Sebaka Derek, Kila Forbes, and also Stephen Olusola. Yes, and in this today's sessions, this is part of the peer learning circles, which is aimed to share knowledge, which is designed for by members and for the members to share their learning and good practices from the projects, operations, research, etc., with other members, and enable meaningful conversations, especially for today's topic. The theme is around localizations. So these sessions will explore how localizations can be operationalized by generating and using community evidence to influence. Inaya, Inaya. Shh. Sorry for the big sound. Yeah. So this session will explore how localizations can be operationalized by generating and using community evidence to influence decision making and financing. It will highlight the critical role of youth leadership, meaningful inclusions, and also proactive gender responsive DRR, while advancing shared power, leadership, and accountability to strengthen locally led humanitarian and disaster risk reductions system. And now with us, these sessions will be moderated by Grace Ananda. So Grace has over 10 years of experience in gender, governance, and also human rights. And Grace has worked with various regional and international stakeholders such as UN Habitat, the African Union, African Development Bank, UN bodies, the Africa Land Policy Center, and she's also professional certified in sustainable agriculture investment from Columbia University. And currently, she is the policy and advocacy manager at Habitat for Humanity International, contributing to the continental networking, positioning, and partnership initiative that promote decent housing and housing ecosystem for vulnerable group. Yeah, so without further ado, I would kindly request Grace to moderate the sessions and yeah, introduce the participants. Grace, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening for me. Good afternoon to our team from West Africa. Good afternoon. Good evening to the East Africa team. And I would say just hello to everyone. And I want to thank you all for joining this session on local actors at the heart of localization. We have experienced panelists with us. We have Stephen Odusola Aladepo, who is going to talk to us about the critical role of youth leadership in advancing genuine localization within humanitarian and disaster risk reduction, DRR system. We also have Kyla Fabes, who is going to give us a snapshot slides to highlight the gap between the Windhoek Declaration's gender responsive promises and the current realities for WLO setting a clear urgent purpose. We'll also hear from Sebaka Derek. He's going to share with us a case study from Habitat Defenders Africa's work with women-headed household in flood-prone informal settlement. And to kick us off, I would like to invite Sebaka, who is an urban and regional planner from Uganda and Africa coordinator of Habitat Defenders Africa. He is a certified environmental human rights defender and educator advocating for climate justice, habitat rights, and community empowerment, focusing on land housing and environmental protection for the vulnerable communities across Africa. And Sabaka, you have 7 minutes to share with us your topic. Over to you. Thank you. And before that, I would also request, if you're not speaking as a participant, please mute. And if you feel there is something that you need clarification on from any of the presenter, I would appreciate if you put it in the chat. Then we'll address it towards the end when we'll be opening the mic for everyone. Over to you, Sebaka. Thank you. If you're speaking, you're muted, but you can see your screen. Sebeka, can you say hello? All right. We can't hear you, Sabaka. Happy if you can check the chat. Perhaps he's having some challenges.
Yeah, let me check with Sebaka. Maybe we can start with other speaker while I'm sorting out with Sebaka.
All right. So let's go to Kyla. Kyla, if you are ready. Dr. Kyla Forbes Beggs has spent 15 years in advancing gender justice in disaster risk reduction across Southern Africa. As both an academia and a practitioner, she has advocated for inclusion and representation of gender issues across regional and international policy. Kyla currently is a lecturer at Durban University of Technology in South Africa. Thank you so much, Kyla, for joining us and sharing your experience. You will be taking us through gaps between the Windhoek Declaration on Gender Responsive Promises and the current reality for WA laws, setting a clear urgent purpose. So over to you, Dr. Kyla.
Thank you very much. Would Hebi be able to share my slides,
Yes.
please?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope everybody can hear me clearly. I'm not sure why I have this heavenly light above me in my screen, so I'm just going to apologize for that. I'm not sure. I'm trying to move the camera, but it seems to be there. So today I'm going to speak to you about my personal, kind of perspective and the work that has been done as part of the Windhoek Declaration, as well as where we are seeing some shortfalls. So specifically, we are looking at fulfilling the Windhoek Promise. So in November 2024, it was a situation where representatives from around the Africa region attended a session in Windhoek, Namibia. And I was one of the co-leads for the Women and Gender group. And so as a result of that conversation, we contributed to the creation of the Windhoek Declaration. So I want to speak to you about particularly the gender responsive side of that and the issues and the struggles that we are having and some ideas in moving forward. Next slide, please. All right. So the idea around having strategic action for gender responsive disaster risk reduction, it's pretty much looking at the idea of how do we bridge the gap between this 2024 policy and the commitments that were made and the reality of what is happening on the African continent. And one of the areas that we think needs to be considered and needs to be formalized is moving from voluntary commitments and to having binding accountability, as well as recognizing that effective disaster risk reduction requires the leadership of women-led organizations and not just having their participation. Next slide, please. So without getting into too much of the details, what we are seeing, what our reality as of 2025, we are still seeing women and children, that they are 14 times more likely to die or be injured in disasters more than men in the context of South Africa. Context of the context of Africa, and looking at the disaster statistics we have. We have a 41% data gap. The reality on the ground is that there's 41% of required gender disaggregated data on the continent is missing. That means that we have huge invisible patches, black spots where we have women-led organizations that are completely invisible because we are not able to actually get as much of the data that we need and to be able to make better decisions. Finally, we have less than 1% of the total bilateral official development assistance actually reaching women-led organizations directly. Okay, so that is part of our reality. Next slide, please. All right, now within the unique context of Africa, and without again going into, excuse me, a lot of the greater detail, I think this is very much something that we are aware of. This is not a new conversation. So just to give an example, that right now, women form 60% of the agricultural workforce on the continent, but own less than 20% of the land. And especially in climate-related hazards and disasters, that they lose their livelihoods to disasters, but at the same time, they cannot always access state-issued relief without holding title deeds to the property. That 85% of the informal economy in the continent is 85% of the employment on the continent is informal, and that local women-led organizations lack formal banking as well as tax clearance required by many standard international donors, right? So in terms of having access to funds, having access to resources and external sources of funds, we don't have it. We are unfortunately in the informal sector where we don't have as much say, right? And a lot of our work is not acknowledged. Our caregiving work, our work in homes, it's really overlooked. And again, we have less than 1% of direct funding when crises and disasters hit. That donors, unfortunately, they tend to panic and they rather would allocate funds to what we consider safe, northern-based NGOs. And they call this the humanitarian bypass. And it starves our local actors who are already doing work on the ground. We come to this session today knowing that women are actually, women and women-led organizations are doing so much on the continent. Next slide, please. And that so much of their work is overlooked. What we want to do is we want to look at organizations like GDN, and we want to look at these civil society organizations to help lobby governments to move, for example, the African Working Group on Disaster Risk Reduction recommendations into law and into budgeting, right? Right now, we want to mandate equal representation of women in all disaster management and budget committees. We want to insist that we prohibit the approval of disaster risk reduction budgets that lack sex, age, and disability disaggregated data. And we want to ensure that, again, working with the African Group Disaster Risk Reduction recommendations, that we legislate that 15% of disaster response contracts be awarded to registered women-led organizations. Next slide, please. One of the suggestions that has come about was the idea of technical twinning. And it's the idea of recognizing partnerships. So I know that going into this, there are probably members of the audience that are saying, once again, it's this focus on women. Now, if we do this, then it takes funding away from traditional NGOs that are male dominant. So this is suggesting that this technical twinning takes place, and that we recognize that often NGOs are, unfortunately or fortunately, led by men, and that we provide high-level satellite data, our complex logistics, and our large-scale technical infrastructure, that NGOs bring that to the table in the partnership, and we shift to a joint venture contracting. Okay, so we basically have WLOs, women-led organizations, and NGOs partnering together and to share budget authority. On the other side of it, we recognize that women-led organizations often are critical in delivering vital information and vital connections in terms of social capital, that they have what we call last mile access. So they are the ones that are really taking action on the ground, and they have significant impact in communities. And often they are leading and taking a strong role in community-led risk mapping to ensure actionable response. So we would like to suggest that we are co-producing our risk maps, combining both the macro data that exists and that is currently in existence and that has been collected by NGOs that tend to have a stronger reputation, but that we're also looking at the micro data that women-led organizations bring to the table. And one of the other suggestions is that we have a 1% direct flow rule, and we commit a minimum of 1% of the total disaster risk reduction budgets allocated directly to women-led organization partners as core support. And this is replacing the constant need, and I think many of you are familiar with this, that many organizations, they are trying to get funding and to try and just keep their organizations afloat. So we'd like to have a request, because of the difficulty of the environment, that women find themselves in women-led organizations, and that we have this 1% that will automatically go as core support to women-led organization budgets. Next slide, please. Right. So again, we are the idea behind this is having women-led organizations in the lead in terms of empowering what we call hyper-local experts, and having directives to ensure that life-saving interventions actually reach the most vulnerable. And how do we do that? We go through women. That using this identification of hazards and looking at this micro-level data, not just macro level, which tends to overlook a lot of the detailed work on what women do, such as also being able to identify localized domestic water scarcity, and also to have localized alert systems and early warnings that immediately reach our domestic sphere and they bypass the bottlenecks. Next slide. And that's the final recommendation is taking recommendation and looking at proposing a model that's similar to the Latin American Observatory or the Gender Observatory model, something similar that we could apply to the African context to track disaster risk reduction funding down to the village level. Why is that? Because currently at the AU Gender Scorecard, it tracks macro, gross domestic product, and parliamentary seats, and that it completely misses disaster funding. And it overlooks really the contributions of women and the experiences of women. So we'd like to suggest that in order to make this happen on the ground, that we start looking at being able to track what is happening and have inclusion audits that document the work of women's organizations and CNOs, to actually report on what is being done. And in doing that, having these published findings and reports, that it will help to build the competition that we need, that is kind of the fundamental basis of compliance. Final slide, please.
Okay. I was just about to, yeah.
Last sentence, that in order to achieve resilience and to successfully actually make the recommendations of the Windhoek Declaration into practice at local level, that we are not suggesting that this is something that we do voluntarily, that this is a regional imperative for survival, and that we can use twinning as a strategic asset not a threat to other organizations, and we need a call for accountability. And resilience requires all of us. I'd like to just thank my audience today, and I would like to thank the organizers and look at who are we going to have that would be willing to commit to have this 1% direct funding rule and this joint venture partnership model, and to support that initiative. Last slide is just a thank you. Thank you, Grace. I appreciate that. And Happy, thank you for sharing the slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carly. You've really touched what is deep in my heart on gender-related discussions. And looking at the statistics that you've projected, it really calls us to do more to ensure that women are invited to make decisions and to contribute to decisions that really affect women most, like disaster-related challenges. And the last word that really caught my attention, you said resilient requires all of us. And hence, it needs all of us to work together to address issues to do with gender, especially when it comes to disaster, because women and children are the worst affected. Thank you so much for managing the time well. You did so well. And I still want to encourage the participants to put in the Q&A button questions, clarification that you need from any of the presenters, and I would appreciate if you write it directly, the question that is meant to who is going to present, if it's Skylar, Sebaka, or Stephen. Thanks so much. And with that, Sebaka, I would like to... All right. Now the mic is working. Yes.
Yeah.
So Sebaka is going to talk to us about the critical role of youth leadership in advancing genuine localization within humanitarian and disaster risk reduction system. I'd already mentioned that you are based in Uganda and you are working for, you are the coordinator for Africa coordinator of Habitat Defenders in Africa and a certified environmental human rights defender and educator, mostly looking at climate justice, community empowerment, and housing and environmental protection for the vulnerable community across Africa. Sebaka, you have 7 minutes at most to make your presentation so that you can create room for the audience to contribute. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Grace, for your moderation. My name is Sebaka Derek, and I coordinate Habitat Defenders Africa. So I'm happy to present a case of Kosovo. Small data meets a big need. So in early 2025, several floods affected or impacted Kosovo informal settlement, which is located in Kampala, Uganda. And women, particularly those heading households, experienced the most impact, to say. And this was the loss of their housing, livelihood, and access to basic services. However, with this impact, we remained largely, many of these women and the affected community never experienced like large documentation, or even their issue was not addressed by stakeholders on board. So us, Habitat Defenders Africa, with partnership with Housing and Land Rights Network, the Habitat International Coalition, we happened to conduct a community-led case study addressing these issues. And the whole idea was to quantify the loss and damage that resulted from the impacts of flooding. And we used a tool called the Climate Change Impact and Assessment and Justice tool. Next slide. So those are the women that were affected. And the findings from this study looked at 30 women-headed household in Sendaula zone. And these findings, this study highlighted 53% of women.
Good afternoon. How are you?
This study highlighted an average of...
My name is Hope Biggs, and
yes.
I am just returning a call.
Could you please mute if you are not speaking? Happy if you could support us in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry,
So,
Derek.
yes, the study findings highlighted that an average household income declined by 53%, and 87% of the homes were damaged and destroyed. Some of them were destroyed, and zero households reported receiving formal state support. Formal state support, I mean by receiving support from the government, and this is Kampala Capital City Authority. Next slide. So with the issue that happened within the community, firstly, as Habitat Defenders Africa, we took a structured community-led response through using the climate change impact assessment and justice tool, whereby we firstly identified the women who are impacted by these climate flooding, by these floods. And also secondly, we trained local youth as legal volunteers who happened to do the research in the communities. Further, we conducted a household level data collection, whereby the women themselves who were impacted by these floods gave us what the loss and the damage of what resulted by the floods. So this approach ensured that the affected communities were not only respondents, but leaders in the process. Next slide, please. So this was the process, small data, big need. Next slide. So the key findings that was in regards to the economic loss, the household income, like I said before, declined below the sustainable level, and the expenditures within the community increased, and on such issues like household repair, housing repair, healthcare, education. And furthermore, the over 56% of the households reported complete loss of personal and productive assets. Remember, this tool that we are using helps in quantifying loss and damage. So with different discussions that are ongoing, especially regarding to the loss and damage, we captured this information from the communities so that we can really address their issues. And these findings reflected structural barriers to recover from climate-affected populations. Next, please, next slide. So why this matters to localization? Firstly, communities themselves generated the data to ensure that affected populations defined and quantify their own losses. Secondly, we invested into youth capacity, which contributed to sustainable and locally enabled data systems within the community, because this tool, as per now I speak, it's ongoing. It's used within the ongoing processes every time there is an impact, and within ongoing issues that come up with climate change, women and the youth in the community use this tool. Thirdly, we as Habitat Defenders Africa ensured that women voices are amplified, and this is a localization practice whereby we positioned women to engage with duty bearers and policymakers, amplifying their voices to drive change. So we typically had a one-on-one engagement with KCCA, that is the Kampala Capital City Authority, and also the national planners. And furthermore, we are presenting this case of these affected women to the fund responding to loss and damage. Next slide, please. So this is a slide showing engagement of women speaking out loud, and our case appeared on local on local televisions, medias. That was Bukede Television and BBS Television. And before I forget, BBS Television came because the area is part of the Buganda Kingdom. So the Buganda Kingdom was also part of the processes to ensure that the quantification of the loss and damage of women affected by floods is generated. Next slide, please. So in closing this case, we as Habitat Defenders Africa further remind everyone here today that we are committed to scaling this model to ensure that frontline communities are not only heard, but at the center to the policy and financing processes. But we also want to emphasize that localization is is not just a concept, but it's an action. Thank you very much. Back to you, Madam Grace.
Thanks so much, Derek. I really like how the slides are speaking much more on the figures, and having seen zero engagement when it comes to formal state support is quite worrying for me, and also as a humanitarian worker. And I'm sure this is some of the questions that are running through our mind. And it's quite encouraging to see that the human rights defender is keen to work with other stakeholders to ensure that the gap that you've realized, especially when it comes to youth engagement in localization agenda, focusing on DRR, is really put at the center of all the discussion. So thank you so much for that. And I would encourage that to continue stay on, and please check on the chat. If there's any question that has been addressed to you, just prepare yourself for that. As we usher in now, Stephen Olshola Aladepo, who is going to talk to us about the critical role, the critical role of youth in advancing genuine localization. I got so confused there. And Stephen has an experience of over 5 years working experience in grants management, compliance, and program design across humanitarian and development setting. Stephen has led and contributed to multi-sectorial initiatives across Northeast Nigeria, strengthening youth-led coordination, institutional capacity, and inclusive development system. He currently serves as the Executive Director of Rise to Shine, Inspire Africa Initiative, and the Chair of Community Engagement, Accountability, and Localization Working Group. We call it Localization Technical Review Committee. I'm sorry, Derek, it confused a bit to share what you are really going to talk about, which was focusing on women engagement in what you do. So over to you, Stephen. The floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Grace. And once again, good afternoon to you all. Good morning and good evening, depending on the time you're connecting. I am Stephen, and I'm super excited this afternoon to be joined by each and every one of you to discuss youth leadership and genuine localization in humanitarian and DR setting. I would like to start by sharing a brief story with us. And I'm certain that a couple of us must have been aware of this incident. It happened in September 2024 in Maiduguri. That's the state capital of Borno State in Northeast Nigeria, where flood water swallowed our entire communities after the Alo Dam overflowed. Disappointingly, our homes disappeared, our roads became rivers, and our families had to climb on top of roofs, waiting for help to come. Unfortunately, help did not arrive from the global system. It came from young people. The help came from youth volunteers who moved through the waters in makeshift boats, rescuing neighbors, organizing evacuation, and supporting our communities long before any form of formal responses was activated. So I want to begin with a simple question. If young people are already leading in times of crisis, why are they missing from the rooms where decisions are made and resources allocated? Next slide, please, Happy, if you don't mind. Thank you very much for that. I would like to start by framing the problem for us to discuss the roles young people play, in advancing genuine localization. It is pertinent to emphasize the problems. And interestingly, for years, next slide, please, Happy. For years, we have seen conversations, issuing out from different forums, from different platforms about localizations. We've made commitments to localizations. We've held global conversations, Interestingly, the Grand Bargain committed to directing at least 25% of humanitarian funding to local and national actors. And yet today, less than 4% of global humanitarian funding reaches local organizations directly, and even lesser reaches youth-led organizations and groups, further revealing the real issue and the problem. And what we see as the problem is not participation, but it's a problem of power, because too often we've seen that the system has treated young people and youth as beneficiaries, treated us as volunteers, and have treated us as implementers. But rarely do we see the system treating us as decision makers, as fund managers, and agenda setters. Now, if localization is all about bringing youth into the system, it has to be, localization should not be about bringing us into the system, we asked, right? We are saying that it should be about redesigning the system around those who are already leading, this implementation and response already. Now, next slide, please. What youth leadership really means. In the next slide, I'll be talking about what youth leadership actually means for us. As a kid, we woke up hearing this statement that young people are the future leaders. But I'm here to refute that statement that we are no longer the future leaders. We are leading already from our respective communities. So for us, youth leadership in humanitarian and DRR system is defined by three core things, one of which is proximity. It is important to mention that young people are closest to the community they represent. We are closest to the community we represent. We understand our context. We understand the risks and the culture, right? So it is important that we are also part of the decision makers. Secondly, agility. We mobilize ourselves very quickly, especially in crisis, using both grassroots network and digital coordination. It will interest you to know that during the flooding in 2024, we saw how young people are leveraging TikTok, they are leveraging WhatsApp platform, various digital platforms, to raise funds, to coordinate. We were practically doing contact tracings through WhatsApp platform, and that is one of the agility we're talking about. This is one of the strategy we're talking about when it comes to youth leadership. Lastly, on this very important discussion and point is innovation. Citing from community risk mapping to new approaches in DRR, we are reimagining how resilience is built. And let me be very, very clear here before we proceed to the next slide, in the best interest of our time, that youth leadership is not a future investment. It is a present-day resilience strategy that we must embrace. Now, having said all of this, we must at least also discuss certain barriers that has actually limited young people from advancing, that has actually limited youth-led organizations from taking leadership role. Now, we've seen that while the gaps persist, it is our collective responsibility, to work towards ensuring that we close these gaps. And what are some of these gaps that we've identified over time? The funding architecture are risk averse. We've seen that donors prefer to, fund established international organizations, while youth-led organizations continue to struggle to meet compliance systems designed for larger institutions. Secondly, we've seen decision-making spaces are tokenistic. So we are consulted in a very symbolic manner, but we are not carried along actively. So youth are associated with volatility and inexperience, despite evidence of highly effective local leadership in crisis situations. And lastly, we've seen coordination system excluding us. We are really invited to the formal seat where decisions are making with the authority to make decision. And lastly, we've seen how local knowledge is also, undervalued. So if we continue to, hold on to this very point, it will continue to, next year we would come back to this very same conversation, right? To still discuss how youth leadership could, enhance, the humanitarian and localization, to drive meaningful localization. I wish to say that we believe in localization, but we don't fund, if we say we believe in localization, then we must make the resources available, not just to the local organizations, but also youth-led organization. Next slide, please. Now, introducing us to what change the code. Now, having explained the barriers young people are facing, we believe that it's high time for us to change the way we operate. It's high time for the system, the humanitarian system, the DRR systems to change how we operate. And for us as young people, changing the code means 4 critical shifts. That number 1, we are asking that we shift from participation to power, ensuring that young people are included in decision-making roles and not just implementation. 2, we must move from short-term project to long-term investment. I wish to say that, state quite emphatically that flexible, sustained funding must flow directly to youth-led organizations and must not be filtered through intermediaries. It is very, very important to emphasize this. And thirdly, we must also ensure that we move from data extraction to community evidence ownership. It is important to mention that community knowledge generated by young people must be treated as expert input and integrated into our early warning, preparedness, and recovery system. And lastly, there's a need for us to move from tokenism to co-leadership. Shared governance between global and local actors must become the norm, because the truth is we cannot achieve localization by inviting youth into systems that were never designed for them. We must be part of the rebuild process. We must be part of the rebrand process. Next slide, please. Even as I walk towards concluding my presentation this afternoon, I would like to lead this call to action, that concrete changes must move from the rhetorics to reality. And for this to happen, we must first ensure that we must ensure that there's youth representation in cluster coordination with real decision-making authority, not advisory rules. So we are tired of seeing you invite young people to conferences. We're tired of participating. We want to also have that decision-making rules. 1. Secondly, we must reform our funding eligibility criteria. It is very, very important that we simplify, requirements and create direct grant mechanisms for youth-led organization. And we must also invest in organizational strengthening for youth-led organization. And allow me to say this very frankly, that capacity strengthening must not be treated as a sprint. It must be treated as a marathon, of course, because if we approach capacity building from the perspective of a sprint, we would come back, we will end up not building capacity, right? So capacity strengthening must be embraced as a marathon. Thirdly, we must also ensure that youth are integrated into our DRR national platform. We have the Sunday frameworks. We have different frameworks that talks about localization, right? But we also are calling that the implementation must include youth-led risk assessment as standard and not supplementary input. And lastly, on this very important point, I would say that we must continue to invest in intergenerational mentorship. Yeah, we must continue to invest in intergenerational mentorship, not as a charity, but as a structural transfer of power, knowledge, and legitimacy. Because moving from the rhetoric to reality requires intentional system design, and we have to lead from here. Now, it will also interest you to know, next slide please, that a couple of young people are already leading this effort. And this is where I'll use this opportunity to invite as many young people that are on this platform to join Change the Code campaign. Please, next slide, where you can either scan the QR code to see what young people are already doing in terms of taking the leadership. So we are not waiting anymore. So we are leading from the ground up, right? And we are inviting every young people to be part of the Change the Code campaign. Change the Code campaign is a global youth-led campaign that is aimed at calling for the inclusion of young people in the ongoing humanitarian reset conversation, right? We have an amazing manifesto with clear demands that we've set out for, for the system. So take a moment to scan the QR code and join this movement with us. And I would like to end with this. Localization without youth is not localization. It is a rebrand. So our ask is very simple. Stop consulting us. Start resourcing us. Stop including us at the edges, but start centering us into the architecture. The grand bargain, the Sunday frameworks for disaster risk reduction, and even the Agenda 2030 that is looking at us calls for all of this. It is time for us to act. And if this must happen, we have to act now. I would also like to conclude by saying this, that it is shameful to see that when we are allocating funding to youth-led initiatives, we invite young people to apply for $5,000, $10,000, and we ask them to perform miracles in 6 months' time, right? This is not sustainable. We must ensure that we invest into a long-term, sustainable, flexible funding for young people. That way, young people will continue to lead, the effort in advancing genuine localization. Thank you very much. Happy for sharing. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share on my thought on this very important conversation. Thank you, and over to you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that comprehensive discussion and sharing the experiences that you have in your organization, especially looking at how the youths can strategically position themselves to engage in TRR discussion. You've said that some of the gaps that you are engaging or you are facing, coordination exclusion, funding architecture needs to be relooked at, local knowledge is undervalued. And you've also made a recommendation that there's need for us to have reform funding eligibility criteria that is focusing on the young people, invest in intergenerational mentorship, which is very important. And then you've asked us who are here to join the code campaign by global platform implemented or coordinated by ActionAid. So thank you so much for sharing your experience on how youth can engage strategically in DRR processes, and most important, they need to be included from conceptualization of the project until implementation to evaluation. And I still want to apologize, Derek. I got a bit confused to mention that you're going to talk about youths, but your presentation was mainly on women, especially working in the informal or living in the informal settlement. So thanks so much for those insightful contributions from Kyla, Dr. Kyla, Stephen, and Sebaka. And now I want to ask Happy if you could check the chat. Do we have any questions that have come up from the audience?
Yes, there are Q&A. There is a questions from Clara Merino. So maybe we can
Okay.
Clara, if you could join the stage and maybe you can
Yeah.
ask your questions and then the interpreter will translate it in English. Clara, are you still with us? Or Abdullah, can we ask the interpreter to translate the questions in English?
Yes, I think, or let me just translate it. Just give me a second. Just
And while waiting for Clara, if you have any questions, you can just click join stage in your screen corner. And then we will invite you to open your microphone and video.
Happy, I just shared the English version in the chats. That question.
Okay, the question is how can women organize in different communities comes together as a movement that unites them. Often they are the focus on specific local studies and practices that do not reach to the national and international level. I think these questions can be responded by Kyla and Sebaka.
Yes.
If you don't mind repeating the question, please.
Yes, it's in the chat. If you can see, Sebaka, how can women organized in different communities come together as a movement that unites them? Because often they are focused on specific local studies and practices that do not reach to the national or international level. So it's more on the how uniting or organizing this women group, because sometimes it's very small, not reaching at the national level.
Yes, thank you very much. So with Habitat Defenders Africa, we have what we call, we have grouped women into cooperatives, women cooperatives supported by the International Labour Organization, which gave us their template and manuals on how to come up with women cooperatives. So these cooperatives have supported women, especially these women who are affected by floods in informal settlements within Kampala. So these women, not only in Kampala, but also on the coastlines, because we work also on the coastlines of Lake Victoria and rivers. So most of the women who stay in such flood-prone areas, the only way we can help them, and also the approach that we are using, is grouping them into women-led cooperatives to support them to come up with joint common position papers. Then we help them to further re-echo them on the national stage. Not only that, we have an approach where we bring the national stakeholders, that is the government, for example, the Kampala Capital City Authority, directly to speak to the women and answer face-to-face questions. So this is how we are addressing the issue for the women voices. Thank you very much, and organizing them.
Thanks so much, Derek. If Dr. Kyla, you can also contribute to that.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a really interesting question. And I think in some ways, it is beneficial to have maybe national level or broader representation of women. But one thing that I think is also key is that in women uniting. So if we have small groups of active women in communities, that we recognize what they're doing and the uniqueness of it, and also recognize that not all women kind of have the same, the same characteristics. We're not all one homogenous group, and we're not all specifically dealing with the same things. But I think that there is opportunities to come together and look at larger civil society recognition and coming together within our different forums, whether it is coming together, for example, in the Women and Gender major group, where we have representation from groups and individuals that are working in communities that are making valuable changes. So without diluting the actions and kind of making it one very broad, women have all the same issues, therefore women, we can all work together and just, kind of see something very broad. I think it's recognizing that women are unique across different socioeconomic backgrounds, across women with disability, young women, older women, and recognizing the unique contributions that they make while bringing them together and having kind of a collaborative opportunity to represent their unique visions and their unique working, what they're doing on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyla. I hope the question has been addressed well. I would also like just to encourage the audience who have joined us today, please feel free to write to GNDR. Would you need more information on the topics that have been addressed or shared today? And with that, I want to thank you all for your contribution. Thank you for being active participant. I want to give special thanks to our panelists for your time. I want to thank Dr. Kyla for sharing a perspective on gender, the gaps that are there in Windrock. I also want to thank Stephen for sharing why youth should be at the center of DRR implementation, and not forgetting Derek sharing more about women households, especially the ones that are worstly affected when there's flood, and the ones who are living in the informal settlement. I also want to thank Happy and Jacqueline and also Abdullah for coordinating us and for the opportunity that you've given us. So I was your moderator, Grace Ananda, and I'm also a board representative for GNDR in the Eastern Africa region. Thank you so much. And now I hand it back the mic to Happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you everyone for joining the sessions. Thank you all the speakers, Stephen, Sebaka, and Kyla, and for all the participants today. We really thank you for your participations, and we are also looking forward for your participations in the Global Summit for tomorrow. Okay, thank you and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you and bye for now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.